We're so excited to have you guys here today. I will turn on my video and get started here in just a couple of minutes. I'm going to give everyone about 2 more minutes to get online, and then we'll get started. As a reminder, this is our part 2 of our Adventures in Topography series. You don't have to have participated in part 1 to understand it, but you will get the most out of this if you have a topographic map that you can write on, and a colored pencil or crayon or marker or whatever other kind of colored writing utensil you can get in red and blue and yellow. If you don't have those things, that's okay. You can still participate, or else we are also going to be recording this webinar too. So we will get started in 1 minute. Okay, everybody. Can you see me? Okay, welcome to our Nature Webs webinar. I'm so glad to see so many people on our webinar today, and I look forward to maybe some other people joining us as we get going. So my name is Stephanie. I am a naturalist with the Montana Natural History Center, and I am so excited to talk with you guys about maps today, because as you will see, I really like maps, and I'm excited to share some of the things that you can discover from maps with you too. This is going to be a really fun and interactive activity that we're going to do together. By the end, you are going to have a map that shows you a bunch of really cool things about the area, and you're going to have some skills that you're going to be able to use to understand other maps and to find really cool things to do outdoors using those maps. So I'm excited to get started. I want to introduce someone else who's here with us today. Sarah is a naturalist from the Montana Natural History Center as well, and Sarah is going to be helping out with our chats and with our questions. So if you have a question, if something's unclear to you, or if you want to add something in, go ahead and put it into the Q&A box. That way Sarah can answer it, and that way they'll see it. If anybody is watching this live from our Facebook stream, hello and welcome. And if you would like more interaction, go ahead and jump on our webinar. There is a link in that description. That way we can answer your questions in the Q&A too. Okay, so let's get started. Let me get our webinar going. So last week, if anybody was participating in the webinar, you had Kelly who was here, and she was talking all about maps, and specifically, how do topographic maps get made? And today we are talking about part 2. Now that we've got maps, what do they tell us, and what can we do to, how can we use them to find neat things to do and to explore nature? So just as a quick review, last week we talked about cartography, and what does that word really mean? It's a big word. It means, if you break it down, you get the meaning. So carto means maps, and graphy means to, carto means to chart, and graphy is from the Latin word meaning to write. So a cartographer is someone who draws charts or draws maps of people, or maps of places. Topography, because we're looking at topographic maps, what does topography mean? We can break that down again too. We've got topo, we've got that same graphy. So topo means place, and remember, graphy means drawing. So topography means drawing a place. And that's basically what we're looking at today. Last week, we explored how you could take a landform and turn that into a map. And now today we're going to say, okay, so what if you have a map and you want to figure out what does it mean and what are all the things in there? And it's important to know, because if you don't know where you're going, you might drive off a cliff or something. So today we are going to do a quick review of just some key things about topographic maps, because they are a special kind of map that shows the landscape. We're also going to look at some other things that topographic maps tell us, and you're going to have a chance to try for yourself using some of those maps and figuring out some of those things. like I mentioned, you're going to need a topographic map, and you're going to need some colored pencils or markers, or, just to make it exciting today, I have one marker, one crayon, and one colored pencil. So whatever you have around the house will work for us. Now you might be asking, how do you get a topographic map? Well, that's sort of a two-part question. The first question is, how do we get topographic maps in general? Well, we get topographic maps by measuring the landscape. And there are actually people who will go out, folks like this surveyor here, and they measure the way that the land moves, the way that how steep it is, what the altitude is. If you're ever out hiking and you see a marker that looks like this, it would probably say something a little bit different because it'll be of where you are. But there's markers that have actually been put all over the United States that mark different altitude and different elevation of places, so that the US Geological Survey can compare, and those are sort of their base markers, and they measure things based on those. We have a whole department in the government that figures things out about what our geography of the United States looks like. And now a cool thing about that is that you can actually get those maps. So you might have explored this web page already, but you can see here that the USGS actually has a website where you can go and you can view and download maps of anywhere in the United States and print them out. So that's one way that you can get a topographic map, but there's other ways that you can get a topographic map too. One cool thing is that the library actually can print out, in a lot of Montana libraries, they can print out topographic maps for you on really nice paper. There's also places like the Bureau of Land Management that sells topographic maps of different areas. A lot of time hunters like to use these, or fishermen or other people who might be going out and recreating. Places like the US Geological Survey, they publish paper maps. I have a collection of, as you can tell, I really like maps, you guys. I have a collection of some printed, nice big ones. And there's even a thing called a gazetteer. I'll show you in this window. A gazetteer, they have them, different companies make them for different states, and they are just books full of topographic maps. So the whole state has been broken down into all of these amazing topographic maps. It's really fun to explore these and think about what the landscape might look like too. But today, I am just going to stick with my printed version that I used. I just used a black and white printer and printed out a version of an area from that USGS website. So you can do that if you want. If you are using a larger map, I would recommend later on in our activities that you just focus on a little section of it, because if you try to do a whole giant map of coloring, it could be fun, but it'll probably be easier if you just like fold it into a quarter and use one section. So let's talk a little bit more about maps, and then we'll get started doing some work with them. So if you look at a map, this is sort of how your map might look. It might look a little bit different. It might look, slightly different, but there are some things other than just the map that you want to know about. And some of them are that'll show where the location is. So in my map, it's up in the upper right corner. And it shows me where it is. My map says it's Lincoln Quadrangle. So I'm looking at my map, it's Lincoln, Montana. This map right here is of Helena, Montana. And so it says Helena, East Helena on it. Down at the bottom of most maps, or somewhere on the map, you'll find a map legend, and that shows you what all the symbols mean. So what does that little square mean? Or what does that little red line mean? It'll tell you that. They want to explain it so you know. And also an important thing to know about the map is the scale of the map. It tells you how shrunken down it is. So how many inches on your map equals a mile. And that can tell you how far apart things are. So some important things to know. And we are curious if some folks would be willing to just share in the Q&A or in the chat, what area is your map of? What map are you looking at? I'll give everyone a minute or two to type in, see if you can find where your map is from, and type into the Q&A or into the chat box where, what area is represented in your map, and we'll share some of those out. Ooh, I'm seeing one of Alberton, Montana, Logan Pass. Getting a couple more questions in there. Sarah, are you seeing any ones coming into the Q&A box? I'm monitoring the chat box. Ooh, we've got Monarch, Montana. Someone from the Great Smoky Mountains, welcome. I hope you're looking at a map of that area. I personally used to go hiking in the Great Smoky Mountains a lot, and I loved to look at topographic maps there. A map is Phoenix, Arizona. Ooh, I bet there's some cool landforms to look at on that one. One of West Missoula. Great. Oh, I got one of the east shore of Flathead Lake. Nice. Okay. Well, we've got all sorts of different places. I can't wait to see what we discover. So let's see what we can find out. So just as a reminder, I keep saying this word topographic map. Gosh, what does that mean? Because there's all sorts of different maps. We learned that last week from Kelly. Topographic maps are maps that show the elevation change in land, and they do it using contour lines. So here's a topographic map, and here is the same area that that map represents. You might have seen the same picture last week. You can see here there's ridges, and then there's valleys, and those same things correspond to ridges and then to valleys. And so areas where it's steeper are areas where you'll see these mountainsides. Okay. Now let's take a quick quiz. I'm going to put a poll up, see if we can remember from last week or just guess from what we're looking at. Our poll is going to be which of those two letters, A or B, is in the steeper area of the map. I'll give everybody a minute or two to look at that map, which letter A or B is in the steeper area of the map. And just as a hint, if your poll just popped up right in front of your map, you can move it over to the side a little bit so that you can see the map and take a look at it. Got over half of us have voted so far. Give everyone about 15 more seconds. Okay. Great work. So 92% of us said that A was in the steeper area of the map. Nice work, you guys. That is correct. So remember, the lines show every time that there's a line that is a certain distance that the land is rising. So if the lines are really close together, that means that the land is rising really fast. If the lines are farther apart, that means that it's a shallower, not as steep slope because they're not rising as fast. Here's a great other example of this. So you can see here, here's an area where these lines are really, really close together and these lines are really sort of farther apart. And if you look at the actual landform that that map is representing, that's what you see there. You see a really steep area and then an old flatter area right here. This is the old cone on the inside of an ancient volcano. And so it was a basalt intrusion that came in there and hardened. You can imagine the rest of the volcano all around the outside of it. And then that eroded away and it just left that steep cone that was inside of there. And that's why that topographic map looks like that. It's that steep part. And then you can see right here at the top, that's the peak. So that's going to be something we look at later. Those circles, those parts where the topographic map lines or the contour lines come around and circle each other, that's where there's a peak or there's the very bottom of the valley. So let's take one more practice. Now we're looking at the shapes of mountains too, and you can sort of think about, so these ones over here are the side profiles of mountains, and these are the topographic maps that match with them. So we're going to do a couple more polls and see. And the first one is, which of the topographic maps do you think matches with mountain number 1? Okay, so which letter shows the topographic map for mountain number 1? Okay, about 10 more seconds. Okay. Let's see. So most folks said that it would be, had a sort of close tie actually between C and D. Let's see what it is. I think we're going to discover something new. Okay, so letter number 1 would match with letter C. Now it's a little bit tricky there because I can see why you would think it might be letter D. Let's keep going and see if we can figure out what one would go with letter D. So let's do our next poll, which is going to see which one do you think matches with number 2? Okay, so which map shows the topographic map for mountain number 2? Oh, we got almost everybody has answered so far. I think we figured out what this one is. We're all answering the same thing. So I'm going to end our poll. And you are all right. Number 2 goes with letter D. So the difference here is, see this slope on number 1 is a little bit shallower. And then on number 2, it sort of goes up and it's flat for a while. And then it's really steep. And so with this one, you can see it's sort of an even going up along this side here. Whereas on number D, you've got that it goes up, it's flat for a while, and then it goes up really steeply. So that's that difference. It's a little bit tricky. That's sort of the fun stuff that we get to do when we look at topo maps. So let's try one more. We've got number 3. See if we can guess which of the topo maps matches number 3. You guys are doing a great job of process of elimination because I'm only seeing guesses for A and B in there. Okay, it looks like everyone's voted. And 92% of us have said that it's B. And that is a great answer. Now, I can see why you'd also think it could be letter A too, because it is sort of a flatter thing. But the key here is it's got 2 peaks here. So there's these 2 top parts, and those correspond to these 2 circles that are right here on the topographic map. So you can see, you sort of start to get the shape of how that all works, and you can start to figure that out. And then we've got letter 4 that matches with A. Now, even though it's got some bumps here, the weird part about that is that the bumps aren't that big of a difference, and so they didn't get caught in a different topographic or a different contour line. They're just all within that same elevation gradient. And here's another picture that does a great job of showing that. If you look here, this is what a hilltop looks like. It's like the contour lines come back together because everywhere you go from the top of the hill is down. A ridge sort of looks like it's going out and coming down there, and then valleys sort of curve in because usually there's a river that's cutting through here, some kind of a water thing. Now, you might think, how do I tell the difference between a hilltop and like a big hole in the ground? Well, the nice thing is that cartographers thought about that and they came up with a different symbol. So if it's a big hole in the ground, like a pit or something, you will see these little hash marks around the outside that are saying it's going down, it's going down, it's going down. So if it's just a circle at the top, it most likely is a hilltop there. I'm going to show this map just one more time because I want to show you here. You can see here's actually the Continental Divide here, dividing Montana and Idaho along the Bitterroot Mountains. And you can see that there's hilltops here. There's a hilltop, there are mountain peaks right here. There's a hilltop here. There's a hilltop here. And this divide, this ridge is connecting all of them. Now here is where there's a river going down, and this is going through the valley. Here you can actually see this is Blacktail Creek, it says. The words on your map are very helpful as well in determining what you're looking at. And another thing that's very helpful can be the numbers on the contour lines because it will tell you the elevation. So I'm looking very closely here, but I see that this one says 8,600, I think. This one over here says something like 9,000 something. So I know that this is a higher point than this one. Okay, So now we're gonna have a chance to do this a little bit. I'm gonna show you what I'm gonna do on my map, and then you guys are gonna have a chance to do it as well. So we're gonna start by looking for the hilltops. And I am going to, well, you guys are practicing work on focusing this a little bit better, but to get you started, I am going to try to find an area where in my map there are areas that look like there's hills, and I'm gonna look for the circles. So I'm gonna go down to this area that looks like there's a lot of hills down here. And I notice that there is a place where the contour lines come together in a circle here. There's a place here. Looks like there's a place right here. Right here. Here's one. Oh, this one says Baldy Mountain on it, so that must be a hilltop. So I'm gonna just go along and start to look for where are the highest elevation points in here. I might even get creative and say, I think those ones might be connected with a ridge right there. But you don't have to do that. Just go ahead and start by finding the spots that are the high elevation and coloring them in yellow on your map. I'm gonna give everyone a couple minutes to do that. I will keep working along with you, but I'm gonna switch my instructions back onto the screen so you can see what you're doing, okay? So I'll give everyone about 2 minutes, and then we'll come back together. And it's okay if you don't get all this done in the time we have together today. Some people will have maps that have a ton of mountains in them. Some people will have maps that don't have a lot of hilltops. And some people have smaller or bigger maps. So just do your best and see what you can discover. Okay, everyone, let's take a minute or two more, and then we'll move on to the next part. You can keep working on the hilltop part after that too, okay? Okay, so I'm gonna move on. And like I said, it's okay if you are only working on part of your map or if you didn't get all your hilltops colored in, but I wanna show you something else we can work on too. And that is, we are going to look for some water features. So with water, there's a lot of different ways that water exists. There's rivers, there's creeks, there's swamps, and there's lots of different ways that those are shown on your map. And so we're going to explore that a little bit, and then we're going to look for some maps there as well, or some water features on our map as well. One thing that I want to point out in this adapted map, this is not a topographic map, but it's a cool representation of a watershed. This map shows that water is sort of in the bottom of valleys, and so it always flows downward. So that's one good way to look for water while we're looking for a map. I'm going to move us through. Here's a quick closer look at this watershed, because when we flatten that out into a topographic map, this is what we get. It's a little bit tricky. You can see there's lots of hills in this one, and those are all represented in those hills and those peaks, and then all those lakes and reservoirs and rivers that connect together. So I'm going to zoom in here to one section of that so you can see a little bit closer. And you can see here the rivers that are in the bottom of those valleys connecting the lakes together. You can also see these little rivers, these tributaries that are coming down. And sometimes they are represented with dashed lines. Sometimes that can mean that they are an intermittent creek, for instance. That means that a creek that doesn't always flow all the time. And then depending on the cartographer, the person who was making the map, they might look a little bit different depending on how they wanted to show that they're little versus big rivers. But remember, little rivers always come down into big rivers. So here's another topographic map of an area where there's a bunch of lakes connected by a bunch of rivers here. This is up on the Hell Roaring Plateau outside of Yellowstone National Park. And you can see here all those lakes connected together and eventually flowing out. Now, here's another really cool example. A lot of times you can tell what direction the rivers are flowing just by looking at them on a map. One thing you want to note is that they're going to flow downhill. So if they're coming down off of a peak down into a valley, they're probably flowing that direction. The other thing is that little rivers always flow into big rivers. So you can see here, these rivers are flowing into this larger river that's collecting them right here. And you can also see, this is a cool trick with topographic maps. This is a little bit advanced. There's little V's that sort of point up the valley with the contour lines of any river valley. Most river valleys when you look at them. And those V's point upstream. So the river flows down from the V's. Here's a better way of looking at it. You can see this river valley and these two ones coming together here. And this is how something like that would be represented in a topographic map. All these rivers draining down into that. Now, one last thing to know about looking for water features on your map is that there are different, like I said, there's swamps, there's marshes, there's lakes, and the maps do a good job of representing those different kinds of features. So here's just an example of some of the things that you might see. Usually these are, if there is like a lot of marsh in your map, they'll put that in the key to your map in the map legend. But let's take a look and I'll give you an example of what I want you guys to do now. And it's basically just what we did before with looking at the hilltops, except now we're going to look for where is the water on your map. So we're going to start by, this is just a bunch of things to think about and I'll read those through in a second, but basically just color your water blue. That's the direction. Find the main river on your map and color it blue. Find the tributaries and color them blue. Maybe you can tell what direction they're flowing and add an arrow. And then see if there's any other water features that you can find. So I will show you what that looks like here on my map really quick. So I'm looking at this area and I see that there is a river that's coming through town. I see this curvy line. I'm going to take my blue colored pencil. I'm just going to start tracing that bendy river. Oh, and as I go, I notice that there is all these little like swamp plant looking symbols and they're for marsh. So there's a marsh in the middle of this river valley. I'm gonna color that in blue. And then I'm gonna keep going. Well, I can read the river name. This is of the Blackfoot River. And I've traced my main river in blue. And now I'm gonna look around and see what else I can do. So I see that there are some little creeks that are coming out of the mountains. And I want to make sure that I color them in. And I know that the smaller creeks flow into the bigger creeks, so I can go ahead and put an arrow on my map because I'm predicting that that's the way that that creek is going to flow. So go ahead and take a few minutes and see what you can figure out about the water that is on your map and color any water features that you can find in blue. I have a lot of swamps on my map, so that's what I'm going to keep working on, I think, while we're all coloring together. So I'm going to share our directions one more time. And then we'll have a chance to try it out. Okay, everybody, go for it. Okay, folks, we're gonna take about a minute and a half longer to look for some water. Again, don't worry if you don't get it all in there, just see what you can find. Okay, everybody. So we're gonna do our last thing with our red crayon now. But before we do, we got two questions that came in that I just wanted to answer for everyone. Someone had a really good question about why is the color on the map? So if you're looking at a colorized version of a map, what do the colors mean? Like the green or the brown on the hillsides, other than just vegetation and water. Usually blue means water, and usually green means vegetation, but cartography is an art, and map makers take a lot of pride in making beautiful maps a lot of the time. And so there's different companies that make maps look slightly different to try to represent different things. And so I know, for example, there's a company called Karen Cartography out of Missoula that creates maps of areas. And when they created their map of Glacier National Park, they worked really hard to match some of the coloring in the map to the beautiful colors that they remembered from visiting glaciers. They wanted people to feel like they were there when they looked at the map. So there's a lot of art that's involved in map making, as well as science and math too, which is pretty cool for naturalists to do. And the other question that we had is, why are there numbers in between contour lines sometimes? I'm not exactly sure what you're looking at, so if I'm not answering your question, please ask it again. But I think what you're referring to is maybe the numbers that either are on the contour lines telling what they are, or it's a number that might be on the top of a peak. And oftentimes they label the elevation of the top of a peak. So if you're seeing numbers somewhere else, then let me know, and I would love to figure that out with you. But I think that that's what you're talking about. So let's move on to our last activity that we're going to do with our maps, and that is seeing what else we can find, because we found the tops of things, we found the bottoms of things sort of by finding where the water's flowing, and now we want to find out what else is going on. A cool thing about a lot of these topographic maps is they also show all sorts of stuff about people. So let's see what we can find, because even looking at this map, we were looking at the rivers, but gosh, look at all these roadways, and look at all of these. There's some houses, all these little squares. There's some other things that humans have put in. So there's all sorts of signs of people living right alongside of these hills and these rivers and places like that. So let's see what we can find on your map. Some of you might have very wild areas, so you don't have a lot of signs of people, but I bet we can still find some in there. You might be looking for symbols like squares, which could represent buildings. You could be looking for things like campgrounds or picnic areas. Sometimes they'll put airport runways. I have a Illinois gazetteer, an Illinois book of maps, and I love looking at all of the runways for all the airports outside of Chicago. It's really cool. You can see athletic fields, so all sorts of stuff. This is not all of the symbols. But now we're gonna just take a chance and look at your map one more time, take your red crayon and try to find all of the places that have evidence of people. So it could be a city, it could be a road, it could be a mine out in the middle of nowhere, any evidence of people that you can find. If it's a map that's of where you live, also try to find where you live and put an X on it. So I will show you one more time as one more example of what that looks like on my map. So I kept working, I added some more blues and some rivers, and I noticed that the town of Lincoln, Montana goes right there, right along the Blackfoot River and Keep Pool Creek. And I see that there's a road that goes through there. So I'm just gonna highlight that road. And you could choose if you want to color each individual building, but I'm sort of just gonna color in the town of Lincoln because I figure it's all pretty people-y. And that's interesting, but if I go and I look farther out into the hills, I see that there's more roads that go this way. And there's even some roads all the way down here. So I find it really interesting to sort of see where those go to and follow those along and see where that red shows up on your map. So go ahead and take a couple minutes now and trace any evidence of people that you can find on your map. And I'll let you know right now, your next question is going to be, what was the coolest thing you found on your map? So while you're thinking about that, while you're tracing your evidence of people, maybe spend some time too finding something cool that you might want to share with us. I will switch us back to our directions. I'm going to take 2 more minutes. I know you've all been finding cool things. So if you're already done tracing areas where people are, spend some time thinking about what the cool thing you want to share is. Okay, everybody, 30 more seconds. You guys are doing great. Thanks for hanging in here with us, and thanks for participating. And remember, you can totally keep looking at your map and working with it if you want to. So if you didn't get things done and you're having a lot of fun with this, adults too, this is a really fun adult coloring project. If anybody needs some stress relief, you want to just pull out a topo map and color on it. So feel free to use this activity anytime you want to try to understand what topo map you're looking at. But I'm curious to hear from you. What did you discover? So if you would like to share, and we won't share names out, but go ahead and type in the Q&A or the chat box if you would like to share something neat that you discovered from your map, and I'd be happy to share that with the group. You don't have to share, but we'd love to hear some cool things. And I'll start out by sharing one thing that I discovered on my map, which was, and it's not even that, I guess I should have known this before because I've been to Lincoln, Montana before, but I think that the name of their creek that runs through their town, Keep Cool Creek, is a fantastic name of a creek. And I just thought that was so interesting. By having to look at the river and really trace it and read all those names, I learned that their creek is called Keep Cool Creek. And it makes me think that in the summertime, it must be a lovely place to keep cool. Let's see. Ooh, I heard that somebody saw a railroad tunnel and Jeep trails. That's cool. That'd be neat to explore. They discovered the name of the Gina River. Excellent. Cool. It's neat how when you look at your map closely, you can really find all sorts of neat stuff there. If there's anybody else who wants to share, I'll give you a couple more seconds. Sarah is sending me a message with some more. Maybe? Okay. Kind of crazy how many rivers go into the Clark Fork. It is crazy, isn't it? It's pretty fascinating when you start to think about just how many things collect together to form our watershed or to form any watershed. That's a really cool thing to notice. Great job. I discovered that if you draw the lines from the map down to the key, then you can see what the landform looks like. Good idea. Huh, I'll have to try that out. Someone else discovered a bunch of airports. Cool. Yeah, there's more airports around than you would think that there are. Really, they're in a lot of places. It's pretty neat to look at them. I see one more thing in the Q&A box. Missoula International Airport. Nice. That's definitely a big evidence of people somewhere. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, and keep sharing what you discovered. I challenge everyone who is on this webinar to take your map and show it to somebody else in your family or in your household and say, hey, look at this cool thing that I found on my map. There's a couple other things you can do with your map, and before we go, I just want to give you some inspiration to think about that. One is that you could find somewhere to take a hike. So maybe you found a trail on your map. That would be a cool place to explore probably. Always make sure you tell an adult before you go on an adventure. You don't want to just pick up a map and find someplace and head out to it. Maybe take them with you to go on your adventure with you. But it's always good to use maps to find a place to go out and discover new trails or discover new places to go biking or to go swimming. You could find a new route to get to school or to get to another location once we have a chance to walk back to school. Find something you're wondering about. So maybe you found a really weird name on your map and you say, I want to find out what the history of that is. Or I had no idea that there was a railroad tunnel there. I want to find out why that happened. So do some research, find something out. And one thing that I like to do, if I'm just looking at a map and I don't need it for anything, I'm not trying to figure something out, I sometimes like to just challenge myself to look at it and see if I can imagine what would be the most beautiful place on the map. Maybe it's a place right next to a nice river bend. Maybe it's a top of a mountain or a place near a canyon where I think there would be a good view. And then imagine what I think it would look like. You could draw it or you could write about it, anything you want to do. So I hope you guys all have a chance to explore maps, get out, find something good to do, and enjoy this beautiful weather that we have today. And I hope that you join us for another Nature Webs. We have them every Tuesday at 10:30, and there's also lots of other great resources available at montananaturalist.org. And thank you again. I'm going to pause for questions in case there's anybody else, but if you don't have questions and you want to head out today, thank you for participating, and we will be around to answer any other questions that people have too. Let's see. I haven't seen any questions pop up in chat. Sarah, have there been any other questions in the Q&A?
There have not. We're good on that end. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'll stay here for about 30 more seconds in case anybody else has a question. Go ahead and raise your hand or pop it in that chat box. And otherwise, thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day and get out there and explore nature. Thank you as well.